Welcome to Chromodiversity, a podcast for clinicians, therapists, and families about common genetic diversity. Hi, I'm Elliot Pollack, and I'll be your host. This episode features the second part of a conversation with Ric Clark from Edinburgh in Scotland. Ric was 39 when he found out that he had an extra 47th Y chromosome, a non-hereditary genetic variation that occurs in about 1 in 1,000 males, but is rarely diagnosed. In the last episode, he talked about how that discovery affected him, the biggest misconception about people with an extra Y, and what it was like growing up as a young child with chromodiversity. In the second part of our conversation that you're about to hear, Ric talks about his teen years, adopting his own child as an adult, and shares key takeaways for other parents and individuals faced with chromodiversity. The episode ends with a special treat as Ric answers a surprise quiz. You would say to yourself as a child, it's not your fault. And that might have been a helpful message for many children who have whatever difference or don't feel that they fit in, that the fact they don't fit in is not their fault. It might be the environment that they're in.
I refer to this kind of chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
Certainly with my father and I, because I couldn't work out what happened first. Did I upset him, so then he upset me? So I upset him and then he upset me? Or did he upset me and then I upset him? I don't know. But then, in actual fact, in some respects, it's irrelevant if I did it first, because it's the parents' responsibility to not be consumed by whatever the child did. It's their responsibility to be a steward, to be patient, to essentially take the less well-informed member of the team, of the family, and help them become better, you know.
How does that inform you being a parent yourself? And can you tell us a little bit about how you did become a parent in the end? Because I believe that you and your child are actually not genetically related.
That's correct, yeah. My wife had said that it was never her desire to be pregnant that would mean that she had become a mother. It wasn't about necessarily having her own child. And she actually she's a neonatal nurse, so she looks after premature babies, predominantly premature, and some babies that have had very difficult births. So they may be full term, but they've got some difficulties. And often, because she's in intensive care, these babies have all sorts of different challenges ahead, whether it's to do with their hearts and lungs or their brains. And, you know, it's enormously rewarding work, but it's also, you know, it can be extraordinarily upsetting as well. And there is a lot of work with the parents who often have to undergo some terrible situations, and it can be pretty tough. But anyway, so my wife, as far as she was concerned, it wasn't necessarily about bearing a child, but she wanted to be a mum, and she'd almost wanted to be a mum. So it was actually bizarre that nature had played its wicked game with her, and she wasn't able to really produce a lot of eggs.
Had you always wanted to be a dad?
Well, for a long time I hadn't, because I saw it as a kind of egocentric kind of pastime, almost, that you would want to produce a child in your own liking or whatever. Later on, when I actually met my wife Lynn for the first time, I mean, literally on the first day I met her, I thought that I wanted to have a family with her. We went down this route with an adoption agency in Edinburgh. In actual fact, because I'm an open book very much about myself, probably a little bit of the autism coming through, I was very open about my experience growing up. I was also open about how I felt about different things. And the adoption agency actually asked us, or they asked me specifically, if I would go through some counselling to make sure that I was of sound mind to become a parent. And, you know, I guess they were doing their due diligence, because it's a process to adopt in this country. You know, it's not just a tick box exercise. They really want to discover whether you have the ability to not only form a bond with a child, but also then bring it up for the next, you know, 20 years and beyond that. And as any parent knows, is that, it's a constantly changing situation. So I went through the additional counselling, and actually that was really good. I decided to just embrace it. And then when we came out the other side of that, bearing in mind, as I said, I've already had quite a lot of therapy. I mean, I think the first time I ever had therapy was as a teenager, and had had it on and off in a few different scenarios a number of times over the years, partly at the behest of my parents because they didn't know what to do with me, and then also partly off my own volition. So on the other side of that, we finally were approved for adoption, and we're approved to adopt one child. So my son, Logan, I saw his profile, and immediately I just thought that he almost looked like us. It's like what they refer to as old school adoption, because he has a certain likeness to both Lynn and me. But I know also, I mean, there's been quite a lot of studies done on this, is that a lot of the boys and girls that are in the care system, that their parents are neurodivergent. A lot of them are. And there's a lot of neurodivergent people in prison, as well. One of the things that particularly sold me on the whole concept of adoption in the first place was the fact that we got an opportunity to break a cycle. A lot of families go through a constant cycle of kind of lack of inspirational people, lack of aspirations, and they don't necessarily look after themselves. They make not great choices. Their mental health is never that great. And that just keeps revolving generation after generation after generation in these families. And I'm not judging them at all. In fact, if anything, I'm very lucky not to be in that cycle myself, or to have got into that cycle myself. I mean, I don't know whether Logan will, he's only 5. I don't know whether he'll eventually start to show some traits. He maybe already is. Well, I've noticed a few, but I don't think there's any point in jumping on it straight away. It's much better just to treat him as a kid and try and help him get the best out of every situation and help him make better choices.
How old was he when you adopted him?
So he was only a year and a half, and so he went straight into foster care from birth. Part of the reason for that was that he was born with not great lungs. He was on an oxygen tank for about a year after he was born, and as it happens, because he's from the southeast of England, they approached in excess of 80 families or 80 couples to try and get someone closer home to adopt him, but they were all scared off by the oxygen tank. But I mean, I think partly because Lynn is a neonatal nurse, and partly because I Googled it, not necessarily the source of truth, but we felt that we would be able to handle that anyway. And in actual fact, we've never, ever had to deal with the oxygen tank anyway. Although he did have he's had issues with breathing, and he's got an asthma inhaler and stuff like that.
What would you say to parents expecting a future child and receiving a diagnosis of a genetic difference such as an extra chromosome?
Well, I think the first thing is that, when you're going into this situation, if you're becoming a parent, there is almost like a genetic lottery. And so, as you say, they may be looking for perfection, but I'm sure there's a book that's probably been printed a few million times over about ultimately you want them just to have 10 little fingers and 10 little toes. Not every child, but lots of children are born with a pretty good brain that works pretty well. And if you engage with it well enough and play with that child, then there's an enormous amount that can be achieved. So when some children are referred to as being unintelligent by their peers at school, I think that's just a lot of the time is completely inaccurate. It's just the fact that probably their parents interact with them a whole lot, and they may have spent a lot of time watching TV growing up. I am generalizing a little bit. So I'm on a couple of Facebook groups specifically to do with XYY, and I see a lot of parents who are frustrated because their son is, a lot of work, and there's all sorts of difficulties they're having. And I know that I was a handful and had some difficulties, and unfortunately my mum's not here to speak on the parents' behalf of me, but I think there is also, I'm not saying that it's a tendency, but there's a risk that you could pin everything that goes wrong with your child on their chromosome diversity. I think that's I think that's not fair on either the child
Mm-hmm.
and also just on children in general. Children have problems. Some of them are related to some things, and lots of them we just don't know why they're happening, and it's extraordinarily frustrating. There are kids that are born, severely handicapped. They may have had bleeds on the brain, that they, have all sorts of potential learning difficulties. And I understand why parents are afraid, because they're afraid that they might not be able to handle it, afraid that they don't have the resilience. But then, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, did you want to be parents or not? I think you've got to just kind of go for it and get the best out of the situation for those children. Another thing, I was talking about mother there, but when we were going to be adopting, before we adopted, she produced a number of articles about children who were adopted and the incidences of fetal alcohol syndrome and, anything that they may have been affected by in utero to do with drugs or whatever. That was obviously a risk. In actual fact, we don't know all the details because not all of that information was available. As it happens, Logan had a bleed on the brain and he almost died. So, there's all sorts of kind of stuff that's going with that. But it's kind of up to you as a parent to be the better person, to not just say, oh, I'm only doing this if I'm got the perfect child, because in fact, quite often that perfect child might end up to not be terribly perfect. So, I mean, you must have seen that film Gattaca with Ethan Hawke,
Yes.
where he's an invalid, and right at the end, one of the guys who's doing the urine test on him or whatever, then kind of passes him or whatever and says that his son is a great fan of his. I just love that because ultimately Ethan Hawke's character was basically working so hard, harder than anybody else to be, valid. And while the system was unfair, he overcame it anyway. So, I mean, that for me is everything. I used to give up too easily on certain things. And I genuinely believe that, I guess it's the closed mindset, the fixed mindset, where if you can't do it, then you're never going to get any better at it. Whereas the growth mindset is that you will keep trying at things even when you suck at them. And every step forward that you can take that might give you some incremental improvement is worth doing.
I'd like to move to 10 final questions that originally came from a French series. First question is, what is your favorite word?
So for some reason I didn't actually prepare for this one.
You don't have to have one. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Serendipity. How do you pronounce it?
Serendipity.
Serendipitous. That's the one. Yeah, exactly.
Serendipitous, meaning something happening fortuitously, but in a positive way, such as a chromosomal difference. May I add?
Yeah.
What is your least favorite word?
I guess actually, more recently, it's probably disorder, because it implies that there's something wrong with you.
Right, disorder in the traditional medical sense.
Yeah.
So shall we say that we talk about difference rather than disorder?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Although I often find myself using the term disorder because it's what people are more aware of, or just because it's, in common use.
What sound do you love?
I really love music by Eric Prydz, who's a DJ, and I think I could listen to that all day long, actually.
What sound do you hate?
Probably, the sound down a chalkboard, that kind of nails down a chalkboard kind of thing. That's probably the only thing.
What turns you on from a creative point of view, spiritual or emotional point of view?
Well, I love moving and I love movement. So I love to watch people move. One of the reasons why I love, video and photography, because you can capture the moment of people moving. But equally, I like moving myself, and I love getting outside. Consequently, I'm much better outside than I am inside.
What's your favorite curse word?
The F word I use, a lot of the time. There is a word in this country which I know isn't often used everywhere else, the C word, which in certain circles, it's not necessarily seen as such a bad thing. In Scotland, that is.
What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Unfortunately, it's probably too late for me to become a professional athlete. In more recent times, I've become quite interested in cybersecurity. I'm not sure whether I'm going to get the chance to do that, to be honest. And equally, singing. I could still go back and do some singing, I think.
What profession would you not like to participate in?
Well, having done this work before, I don't think I'd want to do customer service work or waiting, because I was never very good at it. So,
Okay, and final question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
well, I think I would like him to, assuming it's a him, if it's not, then a her, or are they? I think I would want there to be a conundrum or a puzzle to solve before I could get through. If you see what I mean. If life has been, challenging with an ultimate goal, then I would want that to be the case if I wanted to get to heaven too. I mean, for me, one of the things that came out of my counselling, for example, before we had adopted Logan, was that I really enjoy the journey rather than the actual destination. So I kind of saw it almost as a ball going down a pipe or something. I bounce around a lot and I pick up all sorts of different bits of information. Don't necessarily move in one straight line, and that's a good thing for me. I get a lot more out of life in that scenario. It's not just about achieving things.
Wow, a puzzle to solve. I don't think I've ever heard that answer. It's been wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Rick. I think the ability to understand and articulate insights gained from personal lived experience is rare and valuable. And my thanks for having taken time to share with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to the second part of this exclusive conversation with Ric Clark about his personal story growing up with chromodiversity and his takeaways from lifelong experience. If you like this episode, tune in next week for another exciting conversation with a fascinating guest about their experience growing up with chromodiversity.